Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Gurnam Singh, and I'd like to welcome all our viewers from across the world to another very special edition of the Sikh Think Tank on Punjab Broadcast Channel. The 18th century Irish statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke introduced the idea of the fourth estate, referring to the press, which he argued played a critical role as a check on governmental power. Sadly, though, most of the major countries in the world claim to be democracies and even hold elections, in reality for a complex set of reasons, today across the world, democracies are in peril. This is especially and ironically so in a country that is often referred to as the world's largest democracy. I'm talking about India, which for over 10 years has been led by the BJP government and the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Worryingly, India currently stands at the World Press Freedom Index 2023, which was published by the Reporters Without Borders, at 161 out of 180 countries. This is hardly evidence of the world's greatest democracy. And when it comes to political prisoners, whilst accurate data is almost impossible to establish, across all the states of India we see campaigns for prisoners, especially falsely charged, or in the case of Sikh political prisoners in Punjab, from Punjab, those who are simply languishing in jails almost indefinitely. And in today's Sikh Think Tank, we will be exploring the issue of political prisoners in India and the ongoing struggle for freedom of expression. And specifically, we'll be discussing a new book which has been published recently, which focuses on the issue of political prisoners, and it's entitled How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? Voices of Indian Political Prisoners, and we will be discussing this with the authors of the book. But just to give you a brief introduction, the book offers a rich blend of political and legal analysis with the lived experiences of political prisoners in India, especially those falsely accused of inciting the Bahim-Corrigan violence, the student leaders opposing the CAA, and activists of the Pinjara Tod movement. And we'll discuss more about what these movements were about. The book tells the story of the destruction of institutions, the erosion of rights, and the oppression faced by political prisoners across India. However, it also highlights, very importantly, the resistance inside and outside the jail for the prisoners and their families. And in this regard, the book, whilst highlighting some very serious concerns, also offers some hope. And so to help us to explore these issues, we are delighted that we've got the authors of the book and other people involved. So first of all, we've got Suchitra Vinjayan. So Suchitra, thank you very much for coming and welcome to the show. I'll just say a bit about her. She's an award-winning writer and, as I said, co-author of the book, How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? She has written essays, photographs and interviews and has appeared in the Washington Post, Time Magazine, GQ, The Nation, Boston Review, Foreign Policy, and on various TV channels such as NBC and BBC. As an attorney, she's worked for the United Nations War Crimes Tribunals in Yugoslavia and Rwanda before co-founding the Resettlement Legal Aid Project in Cairo, which gave Iraqi refugees legal aid. She also teaches at New York University and Columbia University and lives in New York. So the other author to the book is Francesca Reika. So Francesca, welcome to the show and thank you for coming. Francesca is an independent researcher, educator and writer whose work is grounded in the values and principles of decolonial philosophy and radical pedagogy. As I said, she is a co-author of the book, and Francesca has worked in various capacities in Palestine, Pakistan, India, Kashmir, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and in Afghanistan. And last but not least, we've got Latika Singha. Latika, welcome to the show. She is an independent writer and a member of the global diasporic collective International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India, which is called INSAF India. So just before we do go into the kind of questions and issues that the book raises, just like to share a 3-minute video which showcases the political prisoners arrested since Narendra Modi took office in 2014. And it's just simply a scroll of the names of 250 prisoners, but it's a very powerful 3-minute video, so I want you to watch this, but just kind of get a sense of the scale and the range of issues that might be behind those names as well. So let's watch the video. So you saw on that scroll some 250 names of prisoners, and I'm sure some of you will have recognized some of those names. Two that I'm sure our viewers will recognize was Jagtar Singh Hawara, and also Jagtar Singh Johal, Jaggi Johal, his name was on there, and many, many others from all communities, all backgrounds. And I think that's one of the important things that we need to register, is that this injustice, when the state commits these kind of injustices, it actually doesn't discriminate who it's going to commit the injustice. It just commits the injustice, and we'll explore some of those things. But Sujitra, we'll start with you. Thanks very much for writing the book, and it's a very powerful testimony, really. And it must have been quite a difficult challenge to get this information together, the data. But what motivated you to write the book, and what do you hope to achieve through this book?
For both me and Francesca writing this book, it felt like the right thing to do. And the reason I say that is because as writers, as scholars, we're all responding to a very particular political moment. And this political moment in India required two things. One was consistent documentation of what was happening, because so much was happening. Because every day, every week, something was happening in which that we felt it was absolutely important for us to, one, document, analyze. But really, it really started with the fact that since Modi came to power, what you really saw was an acceleration of criminalization of dissent and crackdown. And around 2018, at the Polis Project, an organization that both Francesca and I belong to, we started publishing something called Profiles of Dissent, which started as profiling political prisoners in India and what was happening to them. And it was very important for us to place these political prisoners within the larger community. It was not just one individual, one heroic act, but rather placing them within their body of work, the social movements that they belong to. And very soon, with all things Polish, the profiles of dissent proliferated into an active community. Every time there was a new arrest, we had others coming in and saying, no, let's write a profile of dissent from someone from our community. At this point, we felt that as the number of arrests were increasing, it was absolutely important for us. So the book initially started as a documentation of prison writings. There were enough political prisoners in the prison. But as I said, we were also responding to a very particular political moment. The book soon became more than just prison writings. It became about documenting the 250 names. It's an incomplete and ongoing list, but still having that list was important. It became an act of placing the communities themselves at the heart and soul of the book. The chapter Communities in Resistance does that. And then also presenting you and our audience with the legal and political analysis, because it's not only important that we tell the story of political prisoners, we have to understand how is it that we came to this moment. And so in some ways, this book is responding to this very particular historical and political moment.
No, that's really interesting. And maybe, Francesca, I can come over to you now, because one of the, I suppose, imprisonment can be used for different reasons. Legitimate reasons are you actually, genuinely punish people who have committed serious or not so serious criminal offences. But then there's also, when it's used for political purposes, often about erasing people's memories, their causes and their presence. So in some senses, the book is organised around both the erasure but also the resistance, isn't it? So just say a bit about how the book is organised and what was the kind of thinking behind that, and maybe also tell us something about the title. How long can the moon be caged?
So thank you. I'll start with the first part of your question. The book is organized, we like to say, as an inverted pyramid. We start with an introduction that gives a broad analysis of the present. It gives you a sense of what it is to live in India now from a political perspective. Then we go on into one thing that we've always done at the Police Project is to look at instances of political violence not as isolated events, but as patterns of violence, to understand how things are not just episodic, but systematic. And we do that in the chapter called Wages of Impunity, where we understand, we reconstruct the legal history of how we came to this particular historical moment. And then, an important chapter of the book is what we call a season of arrest, which is a very grim calendar of daily occurrences of violence, starting from the moment in which Modi came to power, again, to show how this is not just a one-off or occasional bouts of state violence, but is a systematic attempt at, on the one hand, constructing Hindu Rashtra, and on the other, erasing, as you said, all those who try to oppose it. And then we sort of zoom into the community and that live and resist around the struggle of political prisoners. And that's where we also come to the title of the book. The title of the book is taken from a line of one of the letters that Natasha Narwal wrote from jail. And she talks about how with Devangana Kalita and Gulfisha Fatima, they would spend a lot of time looking at this tiniest little sky they could see from the window of their barrack, and how somewhat the other prisoners made fun of them because they were so drawn from the moon that for many of them seemed a little funny, but they found respite in being together and watching the sky as an omen for freedom. And this is part of the last section of the book, that is a collection of prison writings. The majority of them are published for the first time, and the majority of them are published for the first time in English. So they've all been translated from Marathi, Hindi, Urdu and Malayalam. And then the video that you saw earlier is taken from the last part of the book. There is, as Suchitra said, an ongoing and incomplete list of names of what are, at the time we submitted the manuscript, we're at about 250 political prisoners, and but the list is sadly incomplete because the arrests have continued since, and but it's, to our knowledge, the most complete and exhaustive list that is available on the public domain, and it lists the date of arrest, number of days that the prisoners have spent in jail, and the charges under which they've been incarcerated.
So what are the kinds of legislation that are used? I mean, we know about the various kind of national NIA that's used, and UPA and things like that. So what came through in terms of different kinds of charges? Sometimes they're not even charged, of course. That's the other big thing, and they're often not even registered as prisoners. Yeah.
I think I'll leave it to you. Did
you want? What were the kind of charges that they were?
So I think what is really important for us to understand is that this is an infrastructure. There's regimes we call it regimes of impunity. Which means that, one, you have a series of laws that are put in place, especially the terror and sedition laws, which then allow the state to unilaterally designate anyone as a terrorist. That is the UAPA laws. And then you have institutions. For example, institutions like the NIA, and of course the police and the judiciary. So I think it's very important for us to understand that once you have a set of laws and framework, and then you have a set of institutions that make sure that these terror laws are implemented in a way that makes it impossible for them to come. In terms of the laws themselves, I think what you really have is UAPA is the law that is used predominantly. UAPA was initially brought into the legislative system in 1967, but since then it's been consistently revoked and critiqued and consistently critiqued and changed and amended multiple times. So the laws have existed for a really long time, so Modi did not implement them. But because you already had these laws, since Modi has come to power, the law has been amended. Before, you could not unilaterally designate someone as a terrorist. But with the Modi coming to power and the latest amendments to UAPA, the state can now unilaterally designate anyone a terrorist. And you spend your entire life trying to prove. Again, the charges against you are not clear. Sometimes
it kind of just reverses habeas corpus, doesn't it?
Exactly. And it also means that the burden of proof is reversed. And in almost all cases, bail has become impossible. The other thing that we have to understand is that after 9/11, the American Patriot Act, which became the weapon of criminalizing minority communities, the hotbed of Islamophobia, was also implemented in India, which is called POTA. While POTA was repealed, vast majority of its victims were Muslims. Though POTA was repealed, a lot of the provisions of POTA that made it so inhuman and cruel was then legislated on the back door through the criminal law. So even though many of these laws get repealed, the actual acts themselves then get reincarnated through other sets of legislations, so they still exist on law. Another thing that we really have to understand is that before, there's something called the sunset clause, which meant that every 2 years, you had to go back to the parliament to ask if these laws were valid. Now they've done away with the sunset clause, which means that you have, for all purposes, entrenched emergency laws into everyday life. And again, with sedition, there's no need for proof. With the case of G.N. Sai Baba in the book, you realize that he's convicted of waging war against the mighty Indian state, all based on his bookshelf. So bookshelf was evidence of sedition. So I think what really you see is that the terror laws. And second, of course, are the institutions in which, for example, the police act with absolute impunity. The NIA, the National Investigative Agency, which was born after the 2008 terror attacks, again is bequeathed with immense power. So all of these institutions also then corroborate with the existing regimes of impunity to make it impossible for these people, for all of the political prisoners, to get bail and come out.
Just on that last point, Sujitra, about the bookshelves, So we're working in the Punjab context, and you do find a lot of Sikh activists who are being arrested just because they've got certain literature.
Absolutely.
And by implication, they must be terrorists because they possess that literature.
Absolutely.
Latika, if I could come over to you, you know, this is a very difficult kind of field in which to work. You know, it's for us, you know, we're banned in India, and many media channels are banned now, YouTube channels and things, and some of that really came into force around the Kasani Morcha, you know, but obviously it's kind of much bigger issue. But what I wanted to ask you is, you know, we've had the formal release of the book now, and I know you've been closely involved with getting some of the kind of presence and publicity of it. How has it been received? And dare I say, how has the Indian government received it? If you, maybe, I don't know if you've had any response from, has it been published in India? Is it available in India?
No.
Yeah, I think you can answer that.
Okay.
No, you should.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, it's not been released yet in India. Actually, Francesca and Suchitra are working on the Indian edition, because as they said already, that list of prisoners was incomplete, and we do know that in just these days preceding this what we're doing today, there was a tremendous crackdown in various parts of the country, especially on journalists. 108 journalists were raided together in different parts of the country, you know, and. So that list is incomplete. It's growing by the day, and there are other updates like you know, the case of Professor Sai Baba, which we've just talked about. It was exactly a year today, 14th October, that the Bombay High Court finally acquitted him and his co-accused, because there really was no case, and beyond a point, and. The government immediately went to the Supreme Court, and by next day, he was back in solitary confinement. And the case has...
It's like a revolving door syndrome,
yeah,
isn't it?
And then the case has been reheard in the Nagpur High Court, and now we're waiting again for a judgment to come. So... so they're having to update the book, and then it'll be released in India.
Okay, that's really good. So I just wanted to now kind of dive into some of I'm going to follow roughly how you've organised the book itself, but, you know, we talked about wages of impunity and cracking down on dissent. I mean, I don't know if either one of you can come in first. What do you think the Indian state thinks it can get away with by incarcerating particularly independent-minded people, academics and writers? You know, how does it kind of reconcile the fact that it's, you know, it claims to be the world's greatest democracy, but in a sense it's cutting off one of the most important legs of democracy, which is independent, critical, you know, kind of interrogation of the state and its power. How does it reconcile it? How does it, I mean, both of you, how does it make sense of that? I mean, they must be making that, try to defend what they're doing.
I think now it's
Francesca,
just sheer theatrics. I suppose one of the things that we argue in the book is that there's only just the semblance of democracy in India, and it's just now, if you like, the global tag of largest democracy, but then in fact and in practice, there's a systematic erosion of democratic institutions in the country. And obviously the criminalization of dissent is functional to the erosion of democracy, because it's instrumental to make sure that you can carry on with the authoritarian project that is at the heart of the BJP government now. So it's fundamental to make sure that no one opposes it. And I think what Suchitra mentioned earlier, I just want to reiterate, this is not just a one-person show. This is the result of complicity and connivance of all the institutions of the state, because to create a system of this scale, you need an immense logistic effort where everyone works together to make sure that an ethnocratic state is built on the one end, and everyone else who tries to oppose it and criticize is silenced.
Suchitra, I'm going to come to you maybe a different way. 'Cause I know that, in a sense, you can't have a kind of mean between evil and good, you know. But nonetheless, I suppose, you know, we have a responsibility to put the argument maybe that the Indian state might make is, you know, we're engaged in a decolonization project. We actually are giving true independence to Indians by enabling them to discover their own historical past and really, and it's people who don't like that, people who may be educating the West or teaching the West, who are telling us how to run our affairs. I mean, what do you say to that argument? Because that's very much behind the Hindutva kind of argument that anybody who argues against the Hindutva kind of is an enemy of India claiming its own sovereignty.
I think if they're going to use the language of decoloniality, they should start by removing sedition from the Indian Constitution, which was very much a British colonial instrument used to oppress the very people fighting for freedom and dignity from the colonial rule. But I think more importantly, we have to understand that the BJP government, along with RSS and the wider umbrella of the Sangh, constantly is rewriting history. And they're constantly appropriating ideas like decoloniality and others to make an impossible argument that is India is Hindu. That there's one Hindu, there's one kind of, according to them, there's one kind of Indian, not even Indian anymore, it's Bharat now. For them, it's Bharat. I don't know what then happens. I don't know if you're going to be called Bharatians after this, I don't know. But the idea is that for them, an Indian can only be a Hindu, Hindi speaking, and upper class male. The reality is that...
But they are pains to say that when they invoke Hindu there, they're not invoking a religious category, but they're invoking an ancient kind of a category to describe the people of the Hind, if you like, the Hindu people, as almost a kind of a racial category, if you like, and that's inclusive.
Not really, because I think then they're contradicting themselves, because Savarkar, who is their ideological founder and father of RSS and BJP, very clearly says what he means by Hindu Rashtra. He says Hindu doesn't include, and he lists the Muslims and the Christians, and he talks...
But he does say it's the Indic tradition.
Yes, he does, but...
The Jains, the Sikhs,
Yes, but also you have to very clearly understand that the RSS constantly contradicts itself. And this idea that it belongs to everyone, the mystical past itself is problematic, because how far do you go back in the past, right? And also very important that Savarkar is also, as I said, his ideological founding fathers of RSS, very clearly talks about rape and violence as instruments to destroy other communities. So nowhere in the world can you really reconcile these ideas of what the Hindu right is doing, which means that for them, everything is about othering, it's about dehumanization, it's about destruction, it's about violence, it's about creating an ethno-nationalist state. Of course, with all those who use violence and dehumanization and the idea of creating a community that only belongs to one homogeneous group of people, will use and appropriate all kinds of language. And as I said, if they really want to use a decoloniality, maybe they should start with the Indian Constitution, where they can take away sedition, they can take away laws backward to us, deeply colonial, brutal laws that were bequeathed as a result of departing empires. But more importantly, I think we have to challenge their arguments by really just targeting and showing what the Sangh is. And again, I said the decoloniality argument really doesn't hold once you dive
deep into it. And I think also we need to make it clear that whilst there might be resistance outside from West, there is much more resistance from within, which often doesn't get reported. That's the other important dimension, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Latika, I'm going to come to you to just kind of explore this a bit more in terms... I know you're kind of working... You didn't write the book, but you've been working around this space. You know, what are the kind of long-term consequences for the Indian state for these kinds of falsely imprisoning so many activists, almost like criminalizing dissent? You know, what would you know from other similar kind of situations?
Yeah, I think for me, I try to think of, why are all these prisoners why are these people being imprisoned, and what were they doing that has, made the state as Sai Baba's title of his last prison writing said, "Why do you fear my way so much?" And it came to me that they're all people. A lot of the people. I mean, some of them are from the communities themselves, the communities who have been resisting, being oppressed, and are being resisted. A lot of them are from there. But some of them are those who are organizers in these, you see, or they may not belong to the community, but have come to organize, say, like Father Stan Swami was. He was working with the Adivasi communities in Jharkhand. And it is the ability of these organizers to bring people together and create communities, because that's what really a healthy democracy is about. And for something like a Hindu Rashtra, as Suchitra has just described and said, it doesn't work if there are people living as communities. The idea is you have to build a lot of mistrust and distrust, and people have to, and not be sure about who the other person is. And this is something we see in a lot of fascistic societies. So it's nothing unique also, but at the same time.
So you use the word fascist. You think that Hindutva is a fascist project, or do you think it's heading in that direction? Because some people say that's just a kind of language that has no relevance within the Indian context. It was to do with Italy and Germany and kind of Europe.
Well, to an extent, yes. That fascistic. So I'm using the word fascistic politics rather than fascism, because I think that there will be local contexts where things might be slightly different, but there are certain things which are common to a regime which is becoming more and more authoritarian and wants
political
to control.
violence, using violence. That's basically what fascism means.
And you're taking over the institutions and using the media to propagate certain things as truths and the glorious past that we hark back to. So there are certain things which are in common, but in the Indian context, I would say that I see this as not just arising. I mean, as we mentioned, what is behind the RSS, and here I would actually like to quote Dalit leader and there's activist Bhavar Meghvanshi, who spent time in the RSS as a young when he was growing up, and when he showed a sort of desire for promotion in his local Sangh, he was told that his brain was too active. And I'm going to go back actually to Professor Sai Baba here, because the reason why he was put back in prison in one day was, the reason actually the judge said was that it was his brain which was dangerous. That was the most dangerous thing. And actually so Bhavan Meghvanshi was actually also told the same thing, that your brain is active, and they didn't need vicharaks, which are thinkers. They needed pracharaks, which are messengers, just people who will take the message of the Sangh to the people. So I think we have a deep authoritarianism entrenched in the caste system, and that is...
How do you reconcile that with, because the RSS are pains to kind of evoke somebody like, say, Bhagat Singh, who was a revolutionary socialist, totally opposed to the caste system, but that they give kind of recorded situations where Bhagat Singh was actually with Sarvarkar and some of the others. I mean, is this part of their way of fabricating our history, or does it reveal some kind of contradictions within that movement itself?
Yeah, so it's a bit like what Suchitra said, and Akar Patel has written on his book in the Hindu Rashtra, that there is no... Because it was an anti-colonial movement. No, this whole thing, this ideology is a very shifting ideology. It just sees what it needs to do in a local context to then drive the whole idea of the Hindu Rashtra. So it depends. So it's Bhagat Singh in Punjab, but it's Birsa Munda in Jharkhand, and it's Ambedkar.
So the kind of revisionism, there's a revisionism involved.
Going up. So in every local area, whoever's the local god, hero, are being picked up and then being RSSized and saffronized, and then being sort of re-heroed.
I think it's really important for me just to... this is a really important point that Litika's making here, that the way the RSS functions across India is to take local folk heroes, to take local even gurus and bhagats, and then to, as it were, appropriate them into the RSS project. we mentioned Bhagat Singh here, but also the way in which they've been really making huge inroads into the Sikh gurus and the Sikh tradition, which itself, as we know, was a tradition that was, secular. It was a tradition that was opposed to caste, violence against women, yet somehow it's now being cast as almost the kind of high point of Hindutva, Indian kind of, civilization, cast in the kind of image of the RSS. But I'm just moving on because time is flying, and I wanted to move on to some of the way in which the media is being attacked. And Francesca, I'm going to come to you here. We know that early this month that the homes and offices of over 100 reporters, editors and contributors and consultants associated with the independent media organisation NewsClick were raided under the UPA and India's primary counter-terrorism law for allegedly raising funds for terrorist acts and promoting enmity between different groups and criminal conspiracy. So, and about 46 journalists were questioned, 2 were arrested, including NewsClick's founder and editor, Prabir Barkshata, and the offices have been sealed. So what do you think these events, do they represent almost a kind of ratcheting up, or is this just part of the unfolding project? Because this kind of level of impunity seems to be taking it to a whole new level.
I'll start and then maybe you pick up. So I think what is particular about this latest event is the scale. And as I said earlier, the massive logistic effort that...
About 100 houses of journalists were searched, many arrested, and, in fact, you pick up some of those issues in the book yourself, don't you?
Yeah, so, to raid 108 houses at the same time across the country, it means that you've been preparing such an operation with great care and with great logistic effort. And I think this is something we stress in the book over and over, that, it's important to recognize the kind of effort, the organizational effort that is required at the state level to operate in this manner. And for this to be possible, there is the need of a general obedience by various institutions. So what this latest episode shows is, on the one hand, a serious escalation, also both in logistic and political terms. But also, one thing that we've seen over the years is waves of lulling and spikes of persecution. So it is as if, there is a moment of quiet where people think that they've managed to catch breath, and then violence comes back. Violence from the state, comes back. Yeah. So, and I think this, in many ways, may be a way to, heighten the bet.
Well, let me maybe that's Chitra, we can come in there, because when we had the Kasani Mocha, we had similar kind of arrests, closing down of new independent news media. A lot of the foreign Indian channels got closed down. The UK-based Sikh and Punjabi channels, and we're still banned. And but what we also had was what you can say is the emergence of this Godi media, almost a kind of state. I don't know if it's state-sponsored or state-owned, but there is this real sense that what media exists in India now is fearful and therefore kind of compliant. What do you say about the current state of independent media in India?
Apart from a handful of medias, I don't think there is any independent media left. And I want to make a very clear distinction between television journalists and print journalists. In print journalism, I believe there is still some hope. For instance, a journalist like Sukanya Santa, who we consistently cite and source in the book as primary source of so much information, is someone who's followed this work for a very long time. There's some incredible vernacular journalists on the ground doing this work. There are very few and far in between, but print media in India is still, I would say, the last bastion, which also goes back to news organizations like NewsClick, which take a very consistent position on fighting state power and violence. So that does exist. So I don't want to say that everything is gone, but this group that is continuing to do print media, handful of them vernacular. Print media is also sold out, so I'm just saying that there is still hope for that, and I think we should remember that There's some incredible journalists doing some incredible work at
The
great
Hindu, for
cost.
example, is still quite staunchly. Ironically, the Hindu is possibly one of the most Modi newspapers going.
Depends. They on a good day, yes. On a bad day, well.
And Hindustan Times also puts out some, much more factual reporting.
It really, as I said, it really depends on the individual journalist. I look at more the individual journalists and that. Having said that, the 24-hour news media has become the absolute cesspit where I don't think there are any more independent voices left. What they've really done is they have willingly become an extended arm of state propaganda. Some of the things, for instance, in all of these instances, whether it's the Bhima Koregaon case that we talk about, the Delhi violence from the young JNU students, the Muslim students, Natasha Narwal and Devangana, the Pinjra Tod, or the recent arrests, in all of these instances, before the arrest, you had the media ratcheting up a certain kind of frenzy. Often the media becomes the sole propagator of misinformation. And this is something that's happening that you see with Palestine as well, and this is also happening globally where misinformation,
But how do
disinformation...
those journalists who are working in those spaces, how do they reconcile that? Are they just saying, well, we
they don't have to reconcile because for them this is the reality. And this is something that we document quite extensively in the book, in that they lie and they start believing their own lies as truth.
Okay.
And then second thing that happens is that, for instance, in Omar Khalid's case, a series of news media share a doctored clip saying that Omar Khalid incited violence. In the court asks these news medias to say, okay, can you give us proof, now that you've shared this media as proof of Omar Khalid's guilt, can you share the original? And almost all of the news media came back and said, not almost, all of them came back and said, we do not have the original media, we simply shared what the current BJP minister did.
They're just syndicating false information.
And of course, the BJP minister who had shared the initial clip had doctored the video. So what you're really seeing is the media as an extended arm of the state. Even those who were considered liberal or centrist were often proper. For example, there was a show on NDTV which is considered liberal media, which was recently bought over by Adani, who was very much a pro-Modi camp. Even before the buying over, there was a discussion in NDTV where the question was, should India be secular, right? What is the function of having a show, a discussion where you say, should India be secular? So
that's
what you're
that's a default, isn't it?
So, but the point of and this was done by NDTV, a liberal secular news channel. But the reason you do that is because you want to sow a seed of doubt that maybe it's time for us to debate secularism. Maybe it's time for us to debate if people should have dignity. So what I'm trying to say is that not only do you see a kind of frenzy, disinformation, misinformation happening, at the same time, even those considered reasonably credible create false dichotomies, false equivalences, which make it impossible for us to have reasonable, sensible conversations.
And of course, what you said before, that there's a kind of a binarism between, say, prachar and
vicharak and pracharak. So they have become
pracharaks. And another one that's kind of linked to that is the dichotomy between dharam and democracy. In India, we have our own secularism. We don't have Western secularism. We have dharam, inclusive, religion, and so there is this kind of recasting of something. But look, Tika, I mean, look, along with the free press, we mentioned that earlier about the fourth estate, yeah. Another key pillar of democracy is an independent judiciary. So what's the current state of the independent judiciary today? And we will often say that was a bulwark to keep Indian democracy alive. But it seems like itself has been engulfed into this kind of bigger project, and that's really worrying.
Yeah, I think I don't have a legal background, so I'm not going to exactly. I'll answer your question a little indirectly. In that, when you go through the book and you see the experiences of the prisoners and their families, you realize that what the law, these seditious laws are doing and all is one thing, but then there is what is called the process is the punishment. in which it's not so much the case and things, it's what the person is being put through. For example, the judge says, I don't have time to listen to this case today, after it was listed after a month. You know, things like that happening.
Yeah.
Or you are asked, to these, so there are sort of 200 witnesses the police has decided to include. For every witness, there has to be a different session, and so there has to be 200 hearings or things like that. You know,
So it just drags it on and on.
It just drags it on and on and on, and in that the families are put through hell as well. I mean, it's all there in the book. So that to me is where I think we can say that, you know, where the judiciary is. We have cases and cases and cases sitting in court for years. And
So Chitra, I mean, that's precisely the point. There's this, old adage, justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah.
And in India, there are people on remand for years and years and years. I mean, we had Jaggi Johal, the Jaggi Singh Johal case that we talked about. I think it's been 5 years. And they've got some FIRs, but then one gets kind of disproved and another one appears. It's almost as if there's a kind of a game of just imagining creating FIRs, creating witnesses that just to delay.
In the book, we cite one of the lawyers of one of the political prisoners. He says that the way the system is now set up is that these FIRs are blank checks that you can cash anytime.
Yeah.
And I think what we're really seeing is, I think that what we talk about in the book over and over again is that they have, without changing the constitution, without amending the constitution, without really doing much, they've been able to entrench so much impunity just by action. Let me give you an example of the recent NewsClick raids. When the arrest happened and they arrested the founder of NewsClick and his HR manager, Amit, the police refused to give them the FIR. The FIR is foundations of criminal law in India and in any democracies, that the person accused of a crime is informed what the crime is. In this case, the police refused the FIR. What the judge should have done immediately is to say, please give them the FIR. The very fact that now someone accused or picked up you don't have to show a warrant, there is no evidence, you're refusing to give them even the FIR. The judges could have very simply said, as per law, do what is needed, give the FIR. Instead, the judges said, you know what, we'll think about this. What is there to think about, right? So what you really see is an absolute disregard for the constitution, its rules of evidence, and judges consistently creating an alternative jurisprudence, which makes not giving the FIR okay, which makes not giving the charge sheet okay, which means that someone can be held indefinitely. So you just really see a certain kind of violent impunity being performed and enacted by the police and NIA and other institutions, and the courts validating this illegal, unconstitutional behavior.
Yeah, Francesca, I just want to move on. We are running short of time as well, but there's a very important chapter, Wages of Impunity. I think you mentioned it earlier on, which explores how the state views particularly Dalits and Bojan and Adivasi communities, and how they're often treated even more severely than other prisoners. Can you share some insights into the nature of the kind of discrimination that they particularly face?
I think that's one of the main arguments that we make, that there's, the prison population in India is disproportionately belonging to minorities and oppressed groups. And there's a line that we quote from one of the lawyers that and the activists that we interviewed, who asked to remain anonymous, is that a lot of the concerns that we have are for us relatively new, and the line that they quote is that referring to the Dalit and Bahujan communities, that they always lived with the boot of the state on the neck. So while there is outrage for state violence against intellectuals, and there is a certain level of novelty to that, for the Dalit community is a structural question of life. And that obviously reflects on both the relation to the state and the way in which they are treated in jail, and how, that's constantly in the testimonies of the prisoners, their identity and their caste identity is definitely determining the way in which they are treated in jail.
No, that's really important. I think, I've kind of been saying as well, and reading some of the kind of analysis, that the Hindutva is not really there to defend the rights of Hindus. 80% of the population of India, are from Hindu background, of which a significant majority of them are from, what so-called low caste, of Dalit caste communities. And of course, they're some of the greatest victims of this. And Hanji Latika, did you want to come in?
I wanted to come in. I wanted to just say that a lot of this is, I think, we have a right to know. And we have a right to know about our oppression and where these communities come in. And they do not want them to know. There is a song called the RTI Anthem, Right to Information Anthem, written by two singer-songwriters, Charul and Vinay. And one of the stanzas in that says, "My feet have a right to know. Why am I still trudging from village to village, and there is no public transport even in this day and age?" And that they do not want questioned. They don't want us to have that right to know, especially the communities that we've just talked about.
But actually, that's a really good segue into the next, because we've got 10 minutes. This notion, if people express a right to know, it means that they have a capacity to express that right, that they have some kind of agency. And I know that the resistance chapter, Suchitra, you will know that perhaps the most famous political prisoner in the 20th century, the Russian philosopher and novelist Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, and I quote, "You only have power over people so long as you don't take everything away from them. But when you've robbed a man of everything, he is no longer in your power. He's free again." There is a sense that even though that these people in so much kind of oppression, and in that chapter it comes through that they find a kind of different voice. When you have nothing to lose, then you have everything to gain. Just tell me a bit about that kind of the kind of, and we know about Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks, and I always make that link with this notion of hegemony from below, the resistance from below. How is that coming through in the book?
I think the one theme that's consistent throughout the book is this idea of how resistance for a lot of them is not an act of heroism. The resistance for a lot of them is simply a map of survival. So they're surviving, they're resisting. But at the same time, I think there is an absolutely important acknowledgement of who they are and what they are. For instance, many of the political prisoners in the prison, once they're in prison, whether it's Natasha, whether it is, whether all of them in some ways start organizing within the prison. They start helping others. They start creating communities within the prison where they find solidarities in unlikely places. The second thing you can...
And often inter-religious solidarity, inter-caste solidarity.
Inter-caste solidarities that exist in that way. Another thing that is very important for us to remember is that the kind of humor that comes through. The book, if you look at the prison writings in this book, there is this one poem about a letter to the mosquito net, where it's beautiful because once the political prisoners are in prison, they are denied the most basic thing, like a mosquito net. And one of the political prisoners in the book writes about this mosquito net like a love letter to a long-lost beloved, the sense of like, oh my God, because of you I could dream, the sense of humor, the sense of indignant anger. When Kanchan Nanavare, one of the other political prisoners to die in custody, dies, Surendra Garling writes a letter which is full of anger and emotion. So you see all of this come through, which means that there is a sense of ownership and agency. And all of the political prisoners, as they come out of the prison, are smiling. There's a smile, there is a sense of hope. When Natasha and Devangana and Asif come out, they raise slogans of freedom and dignity. There is so much that happens in these pages where they do not portray themselves as victims. They portray themselves as part of a community in struggle. And that story, and I always say that the Communities in Resistance chapter is in some ways the heart and soul of the book, but also because it's a theme that runs through the book. From the moment we start talking about G. and Sai Baba to Binayak Sen to Kabir Kala Manch. In Kabir Kala Manch, there's this, one of the songs that they ask is, there's a moment where one of the members arrested in the Kabir Kala Manch case says that, the judge who denied me the bail is the same judge who gave Salman Khan, let Salman Khan off in the bail, so there's a sense of humor, the dignity, the anger. I think that's really what...
subversion, all of that is subverting the narrative, isn't it? And the power and the claim that somehow the people who are in prison them have the moral high ground. But I just want, Latika, there's a particularly almost kind of amusing kind of case of Professor Sahiba and the cancellation of their bail on the grounds of having, quote, a dangerous brain. Just tell me how that... Now thinking is dangerous.
Yes, so actually, if you go back to the title of the book, How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? And when I read that, and what I thought Natasha and all were thinking is that how long can you cage a person's thoughts? So because it's not really the person of the political prisoner that the people and the state is scared of. It is their thinking and their brain. And the reason is, I've been thinking about it, reflecting ever since being part of the book, that both this right to think and this right to know that we talk, these are not just individual rights. These are the rights, our rights as a community rights. These are the rights which bring us together. Our right to think and our right to know.
It defines our humanity.
It defines our humanity.
Because, the Latin origin, human is from Latin, the thinking animal. So if you take that away from you, you dehumanize.
Dehumanize, and you turn us into these individuals, atomized beings whom you can then control individually. So it's important to be communities, and the right to think and the right to know is a very important part of that.
Okay, we are now running out of time, but I'm going to give each one of you just 30 seconds, maybe just to say any final comments. We'll start with you, Francesca.
I guess the lesson that we can take away from the book is that however much the state tries to suppress dissent, the struggle is long, but that's a battle that the state will eventually lose.
Suchitra, maybe some hope?
That resistance is an act of survival, that is the most human thing that all of us can do. And it's also important for us to speak up.
Yeah. Latika, maybe a message to the Indian state. I'm sure they're watching.
History, as we know, repeats itself. And history will repeat itself for you as well as for us.
Yeah.
So that's what I would like to say to them.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to how long can the moon be caged? Voices of Indian political prisoners stands as an indispensable chronicle shedding light on the complex fabric of India's contemporary political landscape. For those seeking a profound understanding of the repressive policies of the present BJP regime, this book is an essential read. Through poignant narratives and repression and resistance, it paints a vivid portrait of the decline of democracy in India. As a brave and necessary record, it unveils the harsh reality behind prison walls where some of India's most brilliant minds are confined, victims of an authoritarian state. This is not merely a literary work. It is a testament to the resilience and resistance and bravery of the human spirit amidst adversity, which leaves an indelible mark on our collective conscience. So I want to thank Suchitra, Vijana, Francesca, Rakia, and Latika Singha for wonderful insights into this. And hopefully this book and today's programme and further activism will wake up some minds. Thank you very much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.